Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parents, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in their community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have another podcast focused on global dad issues. We have various features, including Lead Dad of the Week. We have our community, online and in person, but the one-stop shop for all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up today for The Dad at thecompanyofdads.com/The Dad. That's thecompanyofdads.com/The Dad. Today, my guest is Alison Graham, a very successful businesswoman who credits her lead dad husband with being the go-to parent when she was traveling at different times in her career. Alison, a native Australian, came to the States 25 years ago and has had a remarkable career in tech. Unisys, Computer Associates, IBM, Salesforce, Amazon Web Service. Most recently, she switched into the world of real estate. We're going to do something a little different today, Alison and me. Alison's going to share with us the 5 things she learned after taking a big job when her son Cooper was just 2. He's 11 today. We're also going to talk about the role her husband, Ted, a longtime IBM executive, played in being the lead dad when her career accelerated. Alison, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thank you, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
First of all, before we get in the top 5 here, why in the world do you leave, beautiful, fun, sunny Australia to come to New York City in the 1990s? That's, as my 5-year-old would say, that's crazy.
Yeah. You know what? I had an opportunity at 25. I was 25 years old to come to New York. And I was like, wow. And at the time, the company that was asking me to come, they said, it'll just be a year or 2. And I was like, that sounds amazing.
Adventure.
And then exactly, an adventure. So fast forward 2023, I'm still here. I couldn't stay away from the place.
Wow. But you always worked in tech, you sort of, as all of us do in our career, you work your way up, you change jobs, things get better. I always look back, you and I have a mutual friend. I look back to, when she and I worked together, in our 20s, you don't have any kids, you're in New York. It's awesome and fun and free. But then life gets, if you're ambitious, life gets more complicated. So you start getting, bigger and bigger roles. You and Ted meet, you get married. Cooper is born, doing a little math here. Is he born, 2000?
2012.
2012. He's born in 2012. And then 2014, when he's 2, you get this big job. Talk about, start off the shift between being an executive on the fast track to being a working mom, to be an executive who has to juggle all kinds of different things. Before we go into the part about Ted being the lead dad, what was that like, that transition, first of all?
You know what? It was being a mom was something that was really, really important to me. I was definitely what you would refer to as a late bloomer. I was 40 when I got married and 40 when I had my son. And so I had a lot of years of being single and footloose and fancy free in a city like New York. And I traveled a lot and I worked a lot. And when I met Ted, one of the first things I told him was that I was interested in, being a mom. And luckily he said that he thought that was a great idea. And so the transition from always looking out for oneself to the selflessness that comes with being a parent, it was what you would expect, right? Like, it was really, really fun, but really, really different. Yeah, it was amazing.
We have these conversations a lot, my wife and I, but also different guys who are part of the Company of Dads, where you really just don't know. You think you know, and you have friends who've told you, and maybe you've gone to your friend's house and they've had kids. You're like, I got this. I mean, that guy's an idiot. If he can figure this out, I can figure this out. But of course, the reality is so much, different, because, if you're single, or if you're married without kids, if you're with a partner, the kid is the sort of delta in all of those equations. And suddenly you don't, own your own time anymore. So talk about, the before, things really take off, talk about those first couple of years with Cooper and how the company that you're working for then, how did they treat you as going from a full out executive to a working mom? And often we talk about this as company of dads. There's this stigma, even though so many people are working parents in the workforce. What was that transition like for you to have to sort of balance, Cooper's needs in addition to your own, career and personal aspirations?
Yeah, it's a terrific question, Paul. I think I was a little shocked. In 2014, I had a female superior tell me that I was not being considered for a promotion at that time. This is before the promotion did come along, for a different role. And when I said to her, look, I feel like I put the work in, the results speak for themselves, advocating for myself. She said, well, you know what? It's not our fault that you wanted to go and have a baby. And I remember thinking, oh, whoa. You
said that. You said that just came out of your mouth. It wasn't that you were thinking it. That's bad enough, but literally it comes out of your mouth.
Yeah. And this is a pretty senior gal at a big publicly traded tech firm with her own kids that said that to me. And I am the kind of person, you're probably similar, that if someone tells me no, then my resolve just gets really, really strong. Yeah. And so I didn't deliberately go on a different path, but the universe allowed me to kind of pursue something different at the same company. And then, the ascension was pretty quick after that. And I was glad for that, to be away from that part of the business.
Yeah, my wife has been very successful in financial services, and when we have 3 kids now, but when we had 2 and they're 4 and 1, she decided to start her own firm, and she went to her then partner. She'd gone from a giant firm to more of a boutique, and told him, I'm going to launch my own firm. Don't worry, orderly fashion, 3-4 months, clients first. And his first response, before he did even worse stuff, his first response was, I thought I had at least one more kid in you before you went out on your own. Like, what? Which is like egregious, and you can't even believe that this happened this is 2013 when he said this. So this is not 1953. This is 2013. He says this, and then of course he does all kinds of other crappy stuff to sort of edge her out quicker. But it was that shock. And for you, this is your experience is not a lived experience I could ever have as a working mom, as a senior female executive. But what was it like for you to have somebody who would on paper seem like an ally, an executive who was farther up the ladder than you were, who had her own family, who had children who presumably weren't incarcerated because she was the worst person in the entire world? What was it like to hear that from her? We hear a lot about guys being completely insensitive, but what was it like to hear that from a woman who was your manager?
Yeah, I don't want to. It was shocking, and more than anything, disappointing. Because we're in a pretty male setting already. And so the way I came up with other females was that we're here to kind of, support one another, right? Like that was a really big part of the kind of narrative. And to have someone who, that I should want to aspire to be like, to have her kind of, treat me that way, it was pretty disappointing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. But let's switch to the positive. We'll switch to the positive, move forward. You switch to a different division, and things take off. Cooper is 2. I remember 2, 5 is my favorite age. 5 is like maximum cuteness, but 2 is still pretty good. But you have to make this shift. You have to make this choice. How does it come about? I want to get into the 5 things that you learned, but how does it come about when you and Ted are talking about this? How do you make the decision that you're going to find a way to make this work, and he's going to be, supportive of you?
So I will say, before I respond to that, I will say how fortunate I felt back then and still feel. And I'll tell you why I say that. My husband's older than me. So he's Canadian. He was born in 1955 and grew up in a really traditional household. His father worked for General Electric for 40 years, and his mum stayed home and raised 3 sons, my husband being one of them. And then my husband married his first wife right out of university, and she stayed home and raised the kids while he became an executive at IBM. He'd lived in a really traditional setting before we were husband and wife. And so when I approached him about the role, I said, look, it's a global role. I'm going to be away sometimes weeks at a time. And our son is 2 years old. He was like, you know what, you need to go for this. Like you've earned it, you've worked hard, you need to go for it. And I mean, just wow, right? Like, because without that support at home, like you might be able to fake it till you make it kind of thing, but it falls apart. Something falls away, I think, if the support is not there at home. And I was back then, and I'm still just in awe of like how adaptable and amazing my husband's been over this journey. It's been incredible.
So he said go for it. But my wife and I talk a lot about this. We have 3 kids, and she often feels guilty for doing certain things, and I remind her that I was raised in a traditional Irish Catholic family where guilt is part of your inheritance. And one Lent, Lent, you give stuff up every Lent. So one Lent, I gave up guilt. It was better than giving up chocolate. Literally, I stuck to it like you wouldn't believe. Haven't felt guilty a day since. But when you think about, you've had the time to reflect, 10 years back from that, sort of rocket ship ride. Talk about the 5 things that you learned. And I think these 5 things are going to be instructive to other working moms, but hopefully also instructive to other men who take on that lead dad role. What were the 5 things that you learned when you took that big job?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, because taking on this big job, I had people in all sorts of countries that were now answering to me. And so I kind of puffed out my chest, in a work sense, right? I was like, wow, I guess I'm a bit of a big deal. And people were, but I had an assistant, and people were organizing meetings for me on the other side of the world, and I was traveling. But then I had to remember to kind of collect my humility and stay humble, right? When coming home, because home is where the real stuff is happening. And there's no hierarchy in our house, right? Like, we're all in it together, where love is the key at home. And you can't bring that kind of like attitude of like, well, everyone needs to take care of me. You can't bring that home, because it's not going to work out, right? So staying humble and always checking in with my husband became a really important part of our kind of day-to-day. Right?
Checking in what sense? What do you mean by checking? Like
checking in, I'm in Colorado for this conference. Do you mind if I stay an extra day? Or, do you mind if I don't take the red eye, so I'll get home tomorrow afternoon? I know I said I'd be home Thursday, but is it okay if I come home Friday? That's a really small example.
Yeah.
But then on a more macro level, it looks like the company's going to want me to take on some more activities that will entail nighttime events, extended work hours, bigger contracts, bigger customer meetings. Are you okay that I'm still doing this? And making sure that there was just this kind of like, okay, we're in agreement. It was important. Yeah.
And what about with Cooper? Did you have your assistant like sending him memos like, Cooper, I came home last week. I noticed the blocks weren't organized properly. Can you get on this?
Not quite.
We'll see you in the L10 meeting later this week.
But not quite. But you touched on a point, Paul, that became, in the middle of all of this, became a really big deal for me, which was this kind of mum guilt. Like, and it was sometimes a little paralyzing, if I'm going to be honest. If I were away for like more than a night or two, in the beginning, I was really stuck. And then it became 5 nights and 10 nights and 15 nights. And I had to really block out a lot of the noise. Because, people can be unkind even if they don't mean to be, right? So I would run into other mothers at a play date or at daycare. Oh, you're in the country.
So good to see you, Alison. I'm glad you could make it today.
Yeah, a lot of that. And you know what? As women, or like as people, we can drive ourselves crazy with that, right? We can have 15 nice comments made in one day, but that last one, oh, you're in the country this week, can really set you off. Yeah. Right. So I had to cut out a lot of that noise.
But when you would talk to Ted and he would say, okay, yeah, that's cool. You know, you take the different flight, whatever. And, you know, Cooper and I are going to go do, you know, X together. Did he have, you know, did he struggle at all, like getting access to those groups where he could, you know, take Cooper places? Yeah.
He did. You know, we had, goes without saying, we had a Cooper's nanny when he was growing up. This is in Manhattan. She was the fourth member of our family, without question. You know, so my husband and I are both not from America. We didn't have like a cousin down the street or an aunt around the corner that we could call at a moment's notice. So Michelle, Cooper's nanny, really was the glue for those early years, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years of age. And so she often she had all of the access to a lot of the female professionals that I know. The nannies know one another, right? These are all Upper East Side nannies. They know one another. They go to the park together. And so there's not enough I can say for like how much she helped around the house.
Your second point in the 5 is that, you know, time matters. But what you really talk about is that, you know, kind of drill down, is that you tried really hard. You were able to sort of turn off, you know, international work Alison versus, you know, at home mom, wife person Alison. How did you do that? I mean, that's a struggle so many of us have, and you know, work bleeds into home, particularly working in the tech industry where you have all kinds of access to technology to ostensibly make your life easier, but it just really allows, you know, everything to bleed together. How did you, you know, create that distinction between, you know, when you're away and when you're home, and how did you protect the boundaries around it?
Yeah, terrific question. So earlier in the podcast, you talked about, you know, that shift from being not a mum to being a mum, and you're doing so much, right, as a busy working person in New York City. And then you're like, wow, I just added a baby to that, right? I added a baby, toddler, child to that. Yeah. And so similar thing when I was traveling, you think to yourself, I literally can't squeeze any more into a day here. But that, I think, forces one to kind of filter out what's not important anymore, right? So it's not important for me to kind of binge watch a Netflix show on TV. It is important for my son and I to have ice cream for dinner because I haven't seen him all week, right? And make something fun of it. Or it is important, if there's a little bit of daylight outside, to go back to the park and, you know, watch the dogs or watch the birdies in the park. Like, that's important stuff and time you can't get back. And so I felt like I was a more engaged mom when I was home versus just being there all the time. I think it was great for our relationship, both as a mom, but as a wife as well.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I've talked often about is to treat time with your family as if it's, you know, as important or equally important to any meeting you have in the day. So just as if you were having a meeting that you've been trying to schedule for months, you would not hang up on that person if somebody else called. You would not say, oh, wait, hang on, I got to take this. I think we should sort of guard that time with our family and say, like, okay, this is my meeting, and I wanted to make it too corporate, but I am spending the next, you know, 90 minutes with my child or children, and that's sacrosanct. Did you talked also about, you know, in the list of 5, you know, being able to let things go, and, you know, you miss some of the first, and I'll be honest with you, like, that's, you know, hard for me. Like, my wife and I don't even think it's joking, but we'll, you know, we'll go away for something. We'll have it planned, you know, months in advance. And then, you know, just as we're about to go, there'll be like the recital will get scheduled last minute, or the champion playoff. And you're like, why can't these stupid people schedule this stuff like months in advance, like every working parent does in the world? Like, why do you have to wait to a week before? And I struggle with that a lot. We were away for my birthday a week or so ago, and we missed something minor, not of that magnitude. But about it, how did you learn to you know, let go of some of those things that you would miss because you were in, you know, Singapore or wherever you were?
Yeah, you know what? So back to the kind of guilt, part of the equation that I talk about it now and say you've got to let it go. I think for your own well-being and the well-being of your family, you have to be able to let some things go. I feel fortunate. I didn't have to miss a ton of Cooper's stuff, but I missed some stuff, right? And I wasn't there the first time, like he fell in the playground and required stitches, right? Like
that's not such a bad one to miss. I mean, honestly, in like the scheme of things.
And so I tried to make up, we tried, and our life for a few years there became very much around logistics. Like almost 50% of our conversations were around calendars and logistics, like without a doubt. And so we tried our very best to be at everything. But I think if I'm, whoever's listening to this, if it's mums or dads, you know what, being present and being happy when you're with your child is worth much more than being stressed out and half on a phone call while they're in the school play, like all day long. I see some of the mums and dads having to like leave the room, be on the phone, and I feel for them because I understand where they're at, but that can be potentially more stressful than just having to bow out altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of 13 and a half years into this movie called Parenthood, and the worst times have been when I've tried to do two incompatible things, which is to parent and to work. And if you work and you're totally focused on that, goes fine. And if you parent, you're totally focused on that, goes fine. But when you try to blend the two, it just doesn't work. And that kind of dovetails into your fourth point of sort of gratitude and talk about what does that word mean to you as a working mom? What did it mean to you as an executive traveling all around? Talk about gratitude.
Yeah, this one's a really big one for me. It's important. It was important. It's still important for me to let my husband know how grateful I am for his support. He is, without a doubt, the bedrock. Like he's the foundation of every success I have. He's right there with me. Without my husband's support and love and champion, like him being a champion for me, there's no way I could pursue the opportunities that I have. There's no way. And so being grateful for our good health, our good fortune, our relationship, our healthy son, it means the world to both of us. And I think that it's really easy just to be bummed out a lot, right? When you've got too much to do, it's easy, right? You could, oh my God, my flight's delayed. Oh, I can't get home tonight. Oh, my boss has been an ass. Like it's easy to be bummed out. But I used to tell my son this when I was a little kid. I used to say, you know what? Mummy needs to be grateful here because mummy has a choice, right? Some women don't have a choice.
Yeah.
To pursue these things, or some men, all women don't have a choice to pursue these like aspirational goals. And I have the choice to do it, and I'm taking it. And you know what? I think it's been great for him to see his mom go and kick some butt. I think it's great. Yeah.
And you talk about that in the fifth point of sort of, your why for doing this and knowing that they're behind you. And instead of, asking you to sort of reiterate that point, what I would love to do with this last question is talk to you about, when for other, women who are listening to this, for other men who are listening to this, when you think of, you had the support of Ted, you had the support of Cooper. When you reflect on this, and be as honest as you're comfortable being, but what did Ted do really well that allowed you to fulfill your own potential? And what were some, this is the honesty part, you obviously say all the good things about him, but the other part is like, what were some of the things that were points of friction that it took, more than one or two or three times to sort out as he grew into his role as a lead dad?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So look, this is a topic that's bigger than both of us, right? I think knowing that there are men out there that are willing to, because socially, like my husband was an executive for one of the biggest tech firms in the world, who was very actively taking a step back to help his wife at home. The courage and the fortitude to be able to stick with that, I see it, right? And not every family has the opportunity to do that. It wasn't the first year or so. It was not a piece of cake, right? It's challenging, right? And it's challenging when you got your wife on the other end of the line, sometimes crying because she feels guilty, and he's still working. He hasn't stopped working, mm-hmm. and he still has deadlines and goals to meet. But you're really asking that your partner to kind of take a step back while you kind of mm-hmm. shine. And I think if I were to ask Ted now, he'd say, "Oh, of course I made the right choice," but I'm not sure it was instinctive to begin with. It was a bit of heavy lifting to begin with. Yeah, for sure.
And with that, what tips would you give to other working moms, other executives who would like to have their husband become the lead dad and support them in this, and understand that they do have to take a step out of the spotlight, but ultimately it's good for the whole family? What are a couple tips that come to mind for them?
Yeah, you know what, I think if I had a tip, it would be to be kind and be gentle, right? Because there shouldn't be an assumption that like, oh, I let you have the spotlight for the last 20 years, you should automatically give it to me. I don't think that's a good way to come at it, and no one would respond well to that, right? I think what was a great lesson for me, Paul, and why I have so much admiration for what you're doing with Company of Dads, is that I was well into my career before I even thought about the fact that caregivers in family situations were not all women. And I know that sounds it sounds a little bit lame when I say it out loud, but I was well into my 40s before someone kind of snapped back at me and said, not all caregivers are women, right? Like, that men give up their careers too if they've got a sick parent or a disabled family member, and I was like, wow. I felt a little bit ignorant in that moment. And so maybe for the gals out there, just to have that awareness, right? I know there's a lot of advocacy for women in the workplace, and I'm really glad that there is. But I think it's important to be kind and to make room for men to advocate for other men to step up in their caregiving roles. I think it's really important.
Alison Graham, thank you so much for being my guest today on the Company Dads podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for listening to Company of Dads podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. But I'm here to tell you it's just one of the many offerings we have at the Company of Dads. We've got another podcast. We have a weekly newsletter. We have various features. We have events that we put on both online and in person. If you want to know about all of those, the best place to learn about them is to go to thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. That's thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. What do you get if you do that? That's how you sign up for our weekly newsletter, The Dad, which is a one-stop shop for all things lead dad. Thank you again for listening.